But we're going to go ahead and kick off our first panelist, who is Dr. Ryan Luke. Hey, Ryan, good to see you. Dr. Ryan Luke is, again, the Program Director for Adaptive Learning at the University of Louisville. Thanks for joining us today. First question for you, if you could give our attendees here just some insight on your background and who you are and the wonderful work that it is that you do.
Sure. So first and foremost, I am I hear myself echoing, sorry. First and foremost, I'm a professor of mathematics. I've taught college mathematics for over 10 years. And my most recent role has been the program director for adaptive learning at the University of Louisville. I work within our Center for Teaching and Learning. And we have been given a grant from the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, where we were exploring the use and efficacy of adaptive courseware and scaling that out to large undergraduate core courses. So what I've really done in that last 3 years is started with some of our basic introductory courses at U of L that had high VFW rates or low pass rates. And we started working with faculty to implement adaptive courseware and see how we could scale that out across the university into all sections of those courses, hoping to not only improve the pass rate within that course, but also improve our success rates across campus and improving our retention, progression, and graduation rates.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. And so in this session, again, we're going to be looking and speaking with 3 different experts. And so any questions are really available, but we'd obviously want to be focused on the area of expertise of our experts. So before we dive into the audience questions, I want to start with this with you, Ryan, just kind of in this area, this work that you've been doing around, building communities on your campus and bringing a variety of folks together to do this work around course design and pedagogy and active learning and building good models that are focusing on student success. Could you talk a little bit about what would you say is, if you had one key takeaway that you would want our audience members to have, what would that be?
Sure. I think the most important thing that we've learned is that implementing anything into a course and making changes, if we want that to be successful, that there has to be this overall element that's aligned with the course design. So we work within the realm of how do we design better courses? What does course design look like? And that's the biggest piece. So while all of these buzzwords across campus have been going on through active learning, adaptive learning, and different things that people have talked about, it really comes back to how am I integrating that into my overall course design, and making sure that the elements of my course align so that I really do see student improvement on the end. And I think the biggest lesson we have learned is communication, how we communicate early and often. And I will say at the University of Louisville, we did not do it correctly from the beginning. But over the course of this work, especially in the last 3 years, we've learned how we need to communicate, who we need to communicate, how we need to make sure that we're bringing all of our stakeholders together so that everyone that has a vested interest is not only making changes, but providing input and providing feedback about those changes and measuring the impact of what we're doing.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. And we already have some questions coming into the queue. So I'm going to go ahead and tap into some of those. Now, in terms of thinking about evidence-based practices or principles for asynchronous online learning, what would you say that folks are learning at the University of Louisville and in your experience?
Within the context of asynchronous online learning?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay. Well, so I think one of my colleagues will probably be talking more about online development. Were you going to say something, Megan? Sorry.
Well, that's fine. And today everybody is kind of forced to do some level of online learning. I think like one of the things that we're certainly learning in this new world that we're in. So I guess one of the questions we can sort of think about as what you've been learning and from the work that you've been doing at the University of Louisville for several years now, and this transition into this new world where we have online, remote, and hybrid. What sort of tools and strategies are folks using to create good courses? So thinking about course design as they're also trying to be safe in the era of COVID. So for instance, asynchronous learning or other types of activities or technologies that folks are bringing into the classroom. What sort of efforts are being made, or sort of your thinking on what are some best practices in that regard of how faculty should be thinking about this?
Sure. Okay. Now that's helpful to think about what we're doing at the University of Louisville. You're right. Everybody across the country has had to make these changes on a dime about how we approach things. One thing at the University of Louisville, we were very careful to make a definite mark between what was our online instruction and what is now remote instruction. And so our online instruction and course development follows the quality matters framework, but we have kind of branded a U of L situation of that we call our Delphi University, and follow through the same framework that Quality Matters uses. But for our remote instruction, which is what we've all had to quickly transition to, we've had professors across the country all participating in pilots about what's the best way to handle this. How can I proctor exams? Do I do this synchronously? Do I do it asynchronously? What content goes online? What am I providing through email? And I think that we're in a situation now where we're trying to determine what the best practice is. And we just finished our spring semester where was changed at a moment's notice. And we had lots of courses taught during the summer that were supposed to be face-to-face, and we changed those to remote instruction. So the first thing that we did is those instructors that really wanted to do this rigorous testing environment that was not what we typically see in a typical online situation. We tried to pilot all of these different proctoring solutions from ProctorU and other. I don't want to list out vendors, so, but we piloted all of those, and we're still in a phase where we're collecting data from students and from other faculty how that's working. The asynchronous environment, one thing that I can say for that is those instructors that were already using adaptive courseware had an easier time of transition because we never lost continuity of instruction. Those people that were using our college math program or our college algebra program or a program that we had created in physics, all of these were adaptive learning solutions. They were still getting content delivered to them daily that they were supposed to be working through. And these were assignments that when we switched to remote instruction, they already had. And then for the summer, which was entirely remote instruction, that was already set with milestones throughout the summer for them to accomplish. And they had a much easier time working through those platforms because we never lost that continuity. But, lots of questions have been raised by faculty. Well, what do I do? How do I do this? One of the things that we started was within the Center for Teaching and Learning, we developed these cohort groups for each discipline. We had a bunch of STEM faculty come together for certain training where we talked about pieces from Quality Matters and shared that with faculty. But more importantly, we allowed faculty to talk about their experience, what was working, what wasn't working, what solutions we really needed to talk to the administration about. And one of those was being proctoring. Another situation that came up quite frequently is how do you handle online science labs? And what do people in engineering do that are supposed to be needing for lab? What about biology, chemistry? And I think just to plug for University of Central Florida, they did a great job at putting together a resource for remote lab instruction, which we used with our faculty. And so there's a lot of questions that are still unanswered that we're doing our best to try and find out what those best practices are. And as we are opening in the fall, well, our campus has never closed for students, but as we're going back to face instruction, we still have a hybrid situation where only up to 75% of the content will be delivered face to face. We're supposed to have at least 25% of whatever content we're sharing with our students online within our LMS. And I think that this is still kind of an uncertain time for all of our faculty. We have done lots of training from the Center for Teaching and Learning through these cohorts in different disciplines. We are also having sessions or workshops specifically about how do I proctor exams? How do I do the labs? How do I give tests? How do I use quizzes in Blackboard? How do can I use Microsoft Teams? So we are using either Blackboard Collaborate or Microsoft Teams with our students in our classes. And people have been surprisingly just brilliant about coming up with these ideas on how to bring students together in an engaging way. I think what's been helpful for us as well is our agreement with Microsoft with all of those tools at our students' disposal. It made collaboration easy. And so the professor or faculty member was not having to work as much on technical issues or what students could do, but just how am I going to put my content into this format and make it meaningful for my students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. We're also getting some questions around the sort of collaborative approach in building a team, whether it's at the administrative level where you have a variety of folks from different parts of campus working together, but also in the context of bringing faculty together to work together to design a course that's more student-centered and equity-focused. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience has been about bringing people together, whether it's at the faculty level or at the more sort of administrative faculty support level, of bringing the right folks in, and what sort of success you've seen with that?
Yes, I absolutely love that question. I think it's a great question because that's something that we've worked very hard on trying to figure out how do we approach changes within our courses, and who needs to be involved, who are stakeholders. And if you think about, this is a lesson that's kind of taught in all types of project management. But at the university level, we're always asking the question, well, who all do we need to involve because we need to get the work done? And so just setting aside a moment that we've had to make these rapid decisions because of COVID-19. But if we're just looking at how things were on our campus in bringing people together, if we've got something that we want to implement or improve student learning using adaptive learning or active learning, how do we get that started? And we made some mistakes in the beginning because we left people out that should have been included. And I think, so my first tip would be communicate early and communicate often. But one important thing is that you have to have the faculty champions, the people that are actually going to do the work in their courses, involved from the very beginning. Especially in the university system where faculty have faculty autonomy within their own courses. They take ownership of their own sections. It's important that if you want to talk about or improving student learning and student outcomes within a section of courses, then you need the faculty that are going to be involved. The other thing is that you need to think, well, who all is affected by that? Who stands to gain from student improvement? Obviously, students do. I'm not sure that at the beginning we don't need a student voice right away, but we do want feedback from students. So starting my committee or group of people to implement something begins with faculty. And then next, are department chairs affected? Do they make decisions about the course? Should we involve them? Who from the administrative or executive level, who needs to be represented from that branch? Because they're also going to have some impact from student improvement. What about student success coordinators, advisors, people that would be recommending students to go into these courses or advising them moving forward? We need their input and their help. If we've got student success coordinators, we want them to be on board with the implementations that we're doing. And then who can we bring in from our Center for Teaching and Learning? Who can be involved to help us make sure we're thinking through the right questions? So all of those people are stakeholders, and they have a unique perspective to bring to that discussion. I think it's very easy to start with thinking, well, I'm going to go to the department chair and get this agreement, and we're going to try this. And then you end up, well, the faculty members weren't on board, and you should have started with them. We've made that mistake. We needed specific data collected about whether our students were improving, making improvements in learning. And then we find out from our institutional research department that we weren't asking the right questions, or we didn't have a valid survey, or how do we do that? So we should have involved somebody from institutional research from the beginning so that we knew the questions to ask and what could we accurately measure. And I think it's really helpful that if everyone that will be involved knows up front and makes this agreement, it makes the process so smooth moving forward.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like, and what we've heard from a variety of the institutions that we've been working with at APLU as well, is that, it's sometimes trial and error, and there's some lessons to be learned along the way in terms of refining the model for, implementation, but also getting there to the first place. And you actually raised some issues that have been coming up in the chat, in particular about not only faculty buy-in, but also kind of getting folks on board. But how do you measure this and measure this well? Can you speak to that in terms of what sort of things your institution has been looking at in terms of student outcomes or even faculty outcomes to measure the impact and what you're finding and how that is shaping the work moving forward?
Sure. I think, we would love to measure how we have improved our graduation rate. But that's a 6-year period, and that's a very difficult question because it has lots of inputs. So we're trying to measure any gains that we could possibly look for, and that started or began just by looking at the pass rate, or how many D's, F's, or withdrawals we had in each course or each semester, comparing that semester over semester and year over year. So that was the very beginning. But what we found is that doesn't really tell a large enough story about the value added from some of the things that we do, not just implementing adaptive courseware, but how we talk about course design. What about practices that we're talking about with our faculty in teaching them about redesigning syllabi? So how are we measuring impact? So it became we became aware that we needed to collect more information about student improvement, and then some more qualitative data from students about how they were responding to the changes in courses using courseware, and then also faculty feedback. One of the things that we found, just from a more quantitative perspective, we found it difficult to measure what happened to students after they had successfully completed a course in their subsequent courses that maybe that was a prerequisite for. So, for example, we looked in our college math program, which other people may recognize as developmental math. But our college math program, we were working hard to improve our student pass rate. And we did so in a way that we were having 25 to 30% gains in student passing. But it was difficult to track those students after they left that course, depending on where they went next, whether they were preparing for college algebra or another quantitative reasoning course. And we really needed IR to help us try and track these students in a way that we were considering, we were not identifying particular students in the data, but we were just getting the output. And that's why we needed IR from the beginning. The other thing that I'm most proud of at the University of Louisville is that we know for a long time in this country that there has been academic privilege. And so, how do we close the achievement gap between lower socioeconomic students or Pell eligible students, students of color? How do we close the achievement gap with these traditional students that don't have any outside distractions to keep them from school? And one of the places that we found that we've really been able to measure that and close that achievement gap was in this college math class. So now in our college math course, through using adaptive courseware, we had all sections, every instructor agreed to implement the courseware and course design in the same way. And we were able to measure all of these socioeconomic groups, Pell eligibility, ethnicity against each other. And we have closed the achievement gap in that course. All of those groups were passing at the same rate. And that's something we're very proud of having accomplished. And I think that it says volumes about not just adaptive courseware, but also about the consistent integrated course design approach that we were using.
Thanks for sharing that. In terms of, I know that you said you've mentioned working with institutional research quite a bit and the process of that. Can you talk a little bit about, in addition to sort of the measures and working with one's IR offices on your campus to help collect that data? And I know each institution sometimes has varying levels of access to those IR folks. Are there other sorts of measures that have been good in terms of getting student feedback? I know you'd mentioned you're doing surveys with both students and faculty. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other efforts being made on your campus to collect data from students and also share that and what you're learning with the rest of your community on campus?
Sure. I think one of the biggest hurdles that we face about getting student feedback is that, at some level, the university wants to monitor and be aware of all the time that you're polling students or writing a survey. You don't want students to get survey fatigue. Whatever branding your university has, they want to make sure that questions go out appropriately. So sometimes this is a long process, and we found that when we came up with these good questions we'd like to know from students, we didn't have enough time to poll them in the way that we wanted to. And I think that's not a bad thing. I mean, we have to work within our university processes, like you mentioned. But so how do we think about that moving forward? And I think if you want to do a valid, accurate survey of student perception and student metacognition and things like that, you really do need to involve your IR office from the beginning, because you're going to need to make sure that protocol is followed. But some of the other things that we did was just within sections, the faculty members could create surveys within their own courses. And if you get everyone that's teaching the course to agree to use the set of questions, then you have that opportunity. Obviously, students love extra credit, but not everyone's willing to do that. And I'm not arguing for or against it. I'm just saying that is a potential thing that's worked. Another thing is we teach as a best practice, or as an evidence-based practice at U of L, is to get mid-semester feedback. for a faculty member. We know that that improves the student evaluation at the end of the semester. So during that mid-semester feedback process, it's easy for an instructor to add a question or two about some changes that have happened in the course and get some student feedback there. And that's been very effective. Another way was through student focus groups. In a university campus where you have students that most of the time don't have a whole lot of money, they love for you to feed them. So if I invite students over to the dean of students office or the Center for Teaching and Learning to eat with the vice provost or someone like that, we have this big meal and allow them to eat. That is on a larger scale inexpensive to the university as to what it could cost, and it's effective for getting feedback.
All right, thanks, Ryan. And we have a couple of minutes left, actually probably just a little bit less than that. So I've got one question for you, and I think that'll be nice and quick for us and end on a good note. So we've often seen the timeline to see impact on these efforts can take a little bit. Someone's asked, how long did it take to close the achievement gaps in that math course? Just give a sense of the kind of the start and finish and where you actually started to see that growth.
I think that's a great question. And by the way, I saw we were running out of time, so I ended early on the last one. But yes, so we have been working diligently in that course where we've closed achievement gaps for about 5 years. And we started with one product and one idea, and it was not working out for us. And what actually happened is that we changed to a hybrid modified Emporium model where we're using adaptive courseware and instruction within those courses, which all the instructors agree to. And in the last 3 years is when we've seen that gap closing. And it was this past academic year where there were only differences of it's like 0.1%, I think.
All right. Well, it's excellent findings, and I hope that those continue and y'all are able to kind of, share those models across different courses as well. I want to take a moment to thank you again for joining us today. Again, Dr. Ryan Luke from the University of Louisville, doing great work there.